I'm going to show you an inscription in this video, and this inscription is really cool. It's one of the most interesting historical questions because I got to see it personally, first of all, and secondly, it could be from somebody that Paul mentions in one of his letters in the New Testament. Could be, it's probably not, but it could be. That's one of the things that makes it really interesting. So I want to tell you the fascinating story of the inscription of Erastus. If you're new to the channel, my name is Chris. I have a PhD in early Christianity. On this channel, I talk about the Bible and Christian origins. So please take a second and subscribe. Okay, so our story starts when I was living in Greece. I had a fellowship in Athens, so I was spending all my time in Athens at the Canadian Archaeological Institute. Shout out, small but mighty. But on this particular excursion, I went and my mom and my dad were with me, and we went to the archaeological site of Corinth. Now, this is a famous city, famous for Paul's letter to the Corinthians. Probably heard of it. Actually, 2 of them, if not 3 of them. But yeah, we went to the city of Corinth, and it was really cool. We got there at 8 a.m. I just dug out my pictures for this video. I got a chance to go through my old pictures. I have all these random pictures of the city of Corinth, complete with a couple videos of it completely deserted, which it was. It was like 8 a.m. when we went. It was completely deserted. Just a couple of dogs walking around. This dog is a tour guide, and that dog that just pooped. They're giving us a tour of ancient Corinth, and their mom and dad are reading a sign of some sort. So this is ancient Corinth. You can see like up in the hill there, well you can't really see, but there's like a castle all the way across that hill. It's a huge fortress. So we walked around the city of Corinth for a while. It was really cool, lots of really neat stuff there. But I was a little bit frustrated because I hadn't found the one thing that I wanted to find in Corinth, and that was the famous inscription of Erastus. Now, let me backpedal just a little bit and let's go to the Bible. So in Romans chapter 16, Paul has a whole bunch of lists of people that he greets, but in Romans 16:23, Paul says, Gaius, who is host to me and the whole church, greets you. Erastus, the city treasurer, and our brother Quartus greet you. So it's long been thought that Romans was probably written from Corinth. Paul's writing from Corinth towards Rome. So this person who's greeting all these people in Rome, Erastus, is presumably the city treasurer of Corinth. Now, this is going to be important in a minute. In Greek, this word is oikonomos, which is like from 2 Greek words, oikos, like the house, nomos, the law, so it's like an administrative term. So this person named Erastus is or probably we would say an oikonomos of the city of Corinth. Now, back to my story. So I'm wandering around the city of Corinth and I don't see the thing I'm looking for. So I had to go and ask somebody finally, because I knew from reading that there was supposed to be an inscription of this person named Erastus somewhere in the city of Corinth, because the inscription made quite a stir in biblical studies. And sure enough, she pointed me in the right direction, and I finally found this thing. It was completely out of the main archaeological site. It was across the parking lot, down a hill. There was nobody down there. There was nothing down there. I had to climb down this hill to find it. It was down at the bottom of an old street there. And sure enough, at the bottom of that hill, I saw the inscription that I had been looking for. And this is what the inscription looks like. So basically in Latin, this text reads, Erastus, in return for his aedileship, paved it at his own expense. So this is a paving stone dedicated by somebody named Erastus, who is a leading figure in Corinth at some point. So this is somebody who was Aedile of Corinth, which is quite a high financial position. And as you can imagine, when the stone was discovered in the early 1900s, it caused a fuss because people saw the name Erastus, who is some sort of a treasurer or something, some sort of city official of Corinth, in an inscription. And we have this person in Paul's letter to the Romans who is an oikonomos of Corinth. Now, there's a language barrier there, and we'll get to that in a second. Anyway, this was my exciting find. I got the pictures to prove it. I was so excited to have seen, maybe seen evidence of somebody in the Bible carved into stone. So for a long time, scholars looked at this and thought maybe we could reconcile that this Erastus who carved this inscription in Corinth is the same Erastus that we have in Romans 16. Now, to be fair, they got a little bit fanciful with it, okay? So to be fair, they kind of imagined, so they took the Greek word oikonomos and the administrative function, whatever that job was, and they kind of imagined this world where maybe he started there, so maybe he progressed and eventually became this Aedile, which would be a higher title. And they kind of like wrote this history. And this let us think a lot of really interesting things about early Christianity, because we could think, gee, maybe Paul had this like network of wealthy, connected people he was running in. And this would kind of help us explain the growth of Christianity, that somehow it went from Galilean peasants to all of a sudden this like city treasurer or something in Corinth. Like, that's pretty impressive growth. So that kind of thinking kind of dominated for a long time until Stephen Friesen wrote an article called The Wrong Erastus, and he kind of ripped this apart from a few different angles. On the one hand, he showed that Erastus was probably a common enough name that just by chance it appearing on a stone in Corinth isn't necessarily saying anything. Secondly, he argues that an oikonomos wasn't like a really high position. It was somebody who could even be a slave. It was a lower kind of administrative position in the city. So imagining this guy who's like an oikonomos, you know, kind of rising through the ranks to become the Aedile of the city, kind of hard to see. And then the other problem is that the inscription had probably been dated wrong. Dating inscriptions can be kind of challenging, so it was initially dated to the 1st century, which is one of the reasons why you can see Bible scholars made the leap, like same time. But actually, scholars kind of like reassessed the dating and thought this stone is probably from the 2nd century. So this article, and I will link to it below if you want to read it, it's really interesting. This article poured a lot of cold water on the theory that the Erastus that we have carved on stone in Corinth down past the car parking lot, I don't even think you have to pay to get there. I think you can just like go park. If you're ever in Corinth, you don't feel like paying to go in and you want to see this, I think you can just go down the hill. Anyway, it's worth going into Corinth because the museum is really cool too, and so is the rest of the ancient city. But anyway, we don't have any real sense that this Erastus and the guy who's mentioned in the letter of Romans are the same person. But last week I was watching one of my favorite channels, History Valley, and Jacob Berman was interviewing Marcus Vincent, who's a scholar who's doing a lot of work on the letters of Paul and Marcion, and kind of the they're doing like data science, and they're unpacking earlier versions, we could say, of the Evangelium, of Luke's gospel and of the letters of Paul. And Jacob Berman asked this interesting question because scholars have long thought that the end of Romans could be a later addition, because we have this benediction and then we have this whole extra part about who gets greeted. And there's sort of this ongoing stuff, and I should do videos about it in the future, but it's wild that often it seems like a lot of the stuff that was added on to some of Paul's letters later is networks. It's often like people. And it's really weird if you think of these things as general and circulating, that it's actually the names of people that would have been added in later. This is fascinating. All that to say, it gives rise to another possibility, and I don't know who's going to go look at this. I hope somebody does. But it also gives rise to a question of whether this name was interjected in the 2nd century, whether this is the name of somebody, relatively well-known or famous in Corinth, whether this network in Corinth was kind of made up based on some kind of figure of Erastus. And I don't know if this is possible. I'm just saying Jacob Berman asked it, and I thought it was a super interesting question. But anyway, hearing him ask that question got me thinking again about this awesome trip that I took to Corinth when I lived in Greece, which, like, let's be honest, was the best life I've ever lived. It was fantastic. And that is the story of one of the people in the New Testament, one of the names in Paul's network, who could be carved into the stones of ancient Corinth, but it's probably not him, as I said. I hope this was interesting to you. If you love this kind of stuff, do check out my podcast, Footnote Famous, where I talk about the Bible and Christian origins, and I get to interview some of the world's top Bible scholars, which is super fun. If you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, subscribe. I talk about same thing, Bible, Christian origins, a little bit about modern Christianity. You can check out my website, cjcornthwaite.com. Join my mailing list there. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I will see you next time.